My name is Daniel Carter, and if you saw me today sitting on a corner with a worn coat and a paper cup, you'd probably walk past me without a second thought. Most people do. To them, I'm just another homeless man, another shadow among many, a reminder of something they'd rather not see. But I wasn't always this way. I had a family, a home, a life that mattered. And then, in one night of fire and smoke, it was all taken from me. I was born and raised in Ohio. My childhood wasn't perfect, but it was filled with the kind of simple values my parents clung to: hard work, honesty, loyalty. My father drove trucks for a living, and my mother worked as a school secretary. They didn't have much, but they gave me what they could: warm meals, clothes that fit, and the belief that family was the anchor you could always return to. As a boy, I dreamed of the kind of family I would build one day. I pictured Sunday dinners around a crowded table, the sound of children laughing in the backyard, the steady warmth of a wife's hand in mine. Those dreams stayed with me through high school, through my first job at a factory, through the long nights when I wondered what the future might hold. Then I met Sarah. I still remember the first time I saw her. It was at the county fair, the smell of fried dough and popcorn in the air, lights from the Ferris wheel spinning overhead. She was standing in line for lemonade, her hair catching the glow of the bulbs strung across the stalls. I don't know what gave me the courage, but I walked up and asked if she wanted company. She smiled, and in that instant, I knew. She was the one. We married a few years later in the little church where my parents had said their vows. Money was tight, but love was abundant. Sarah had a laugh that could brighten any room, and a way of looking at me that made me feel like I was more than I ever believed I could be. Together, we bought a small house on Maple Street, a modest place with peeling paint and a leaky roof, but it was ours. Soon, our family grew. First came Emma, with her wide brown eyes and curious hands reaching for everything. Then Jacob, full of energy, running through the halls before he could even talk properly. Our house was chaos: messy rooms, toys underfoot, late-night cries. But it was the kind of chaos I had always dreamed of. I worked long shifts at the factory, Sarah worked part-time at the library, and together we made ends meet. Life wasn't easy, but it was full. It was good. I used to come home from work exhausted, my body aching, but as soon as I heard Emma shout, "Daddy!" and saw Jacob racing toward me with his arms outstretched, all the weight of the day lifted. Sarah would meet me at the door, her smile tired but warm, and for a moment, the world outside didn't matter. We had built something real, something strong. Our home wasn't fancy. The living room furniture was secondhand, the yard needed constant mowing, the roof leaked when it rained too hard. But to me, it was a castle. The walls held laughter, the kitchen held love, and every corner echoed with the sound of our children's voices. I thought it would last forever. But forever is a fragile thing. I didn't know as I tucked my children into bed each night, as I kissed Sarah goodnight under the soft glow of the lamp, that a single night could undo everything. I didn't know that fire could steal more than wood and stone. It could steal futures, memories, entire lives. Now when people pass me this on the street, they see only the ruin. They don't see the man I was, the husband, the father, the provider. They don't see the house on Maple Street, or the way Sarah laughed as she burned cookies in the oven, or the way Emma clung to her favorite teddy bear, or the way Jacob demanded I play catch even when I could barely keep my eyes open. They don't see that I once had everything. But I did, and the story of how I lost it all begins with fire. Before the flames, before the ashes, my life was full in ways I sometimes still struggle to believe. It wasn't grand, it wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and it was beautiful. Sarah and I poured everything we had into making that small house on Maple Street a home. The walls told our story. In the living room, there were faint crayon marks from when Emma decided the wall was her canvas. In the hallway, Jacob's muddy footprints left trails after afternoons spent playing in the yard. The kitchen always smelled like something Sarah was baking, even when she burned it. And our bedroom, it wasn't big, but it held the whispered promises of a couple determined to make it through life together, no matter what. Weekends were sacred. Saturdays meant mowing the lawn, fixing the roof, or painting yet another coat over the peeling siding. I grumbled sometimes, but deep down, I loved it. There was pride in watching our home transform under our care. Sarah made even chores fun. She'd blast music from the old radio, dancing around with a paintbrush in her hand, laughing until the kids joined in. I'd watch her twirl Emma in circles, Jacob stomping his little feet in rhythm, and I'd think, this is happiness. This is everything I've ever wanted. Sundays were family days. We went to church in the morning, dressed in our best clothes, Sarah's hand tucked in mine as we herded the kids down the aisle. Afterward, we'd return home for Sunday dinner, sometimes a roast if we could afford it, sometimes just spaghetti, but always enough to bring us together at the table. We bowed our heads, said grace, and then shared stories from the week, laughter weaving through every bite. Money was always tight. My job at the factory paid enough to cover bills, but never enough to make life easy. Sarah's part-time shifts at the library helped, but most of our luxuries came in the form of love and imagination. Vacations weren't trips to beaches or amusement parks. They were camping in the backyard, making s'mores over a fire pit, staring up at the stars as if we were miles away from the world. Christmas gifts weren't expensive gadgets. They were homemade crafts, second-hand treasures, and they watched on Emma's and Jacob's faces as they tore through wrapping paper. I didn't care about what we lacked. I cared about what we had. And what we had was a family that turned scarcity into abundance. The kids were growing fast. Emma was already reading chapter books, curling up on the couch with her nose buried in pages while Sarah beamed with pride. Jacob, younger but bold, wanted to be just like his dad. He'd follow me into the garage, asking to hold tools too big for his small hands, pretending he was fixing the car right alongside me. His determination reminded me of my father, and it filled me with hope that one day he'd grow into a man who could face the world with strength. Evenings were my favorite. I'd come home from long shifts at the factory, my body aching, but as soon as I walked through the door, everything felt lighter. Emma would shout, "Daddy!" and leap into my arms. Jacob would tug at my pant leg, demanding I play. Sarah would greet me with a kiss, her smile tired but full of love. We'd eat dinner together, then pile onto the couch. The kids nestled between us as we watched cartoons or read bedtime stories. When the kids were asleep, Sarah and I would sit on the porch, sipping tea, talking about the future. She dreamed of expanding the garden, of repainting the kitchen, of maybe one day adding a room when the kids grew older. I dreamed of giving her those things, of working hard enough to make them real. Sometimes we sat in silence, just listening to the crickets and watching the stars. In those quiet moments, the world felt steady, unshakable. I believed our life was indestructible, and yet all it took was one night to prove how fragile it truly was. I think back to those days often, not because they were extraordinary, but because they were ordinary in the best way. They were the kind of days you take for granted, assuming they'll always be there. You never imagine that one day the laughter will fall silent, the walls will crumble, and the people who made it all worth living for will be gone. But before the fire, before everything was reduced to smoke and rubble, I had the life I always dreamed of. A wife who loved me, children who adored me, a home that was messy and imperfect but full of warmth. That was the life we built, and that was the life I would lose in the blink of an eye. It was a cold November night, the kind where the wind rattled the windows and the trees bent low, their branches clawing against the siding. Sarah had made stew for dinner, and the smell still lingered in the kitchen as we tucked the kids into bed. Emma had insisted on one more story, and Jacob had fought sleep until his eyes finally surrendered. By the time the house grew quiet, I felt the kind of tired that settled deep in the bones. I remember sitting on the couch with Sarah, the two of us sharing a blanket, the television murmuring in the background. We talked about the upcoming holidays, about whether we could afford new coats for the kids, about the little things that filled our days. Eventually, she leaned against my shoulder and drifted off. I kissed the top of her head, grateful for the peace of that moment. I didn't know it would be the last peace I'd ever feel. Sometime after midnight, I woke to the smell of smoke. At first, I thought I was dreaming. The haze in the air seemed unreal, the faint crackle distant. But then I heard it, the sharp, hungry roar of flames. I shot up, heart pounding, and saw orange light flickering against the walls. "Sarah!" I shouted, shaking her awake. Her eyes widened in terror as the smoke thickened, curling around us like a living thing. I ran down the hall, coughing, my throat burning. The air was thick, suffocating. I pushed into Emma's room first. She was curled under the blankets, coughing, eyes wide with fear. I scooped her into my arms, whispering, "It's okay. Daddy's here." She clung to me, trembling. "Jacob," Sarah cried from behind me, already rushing to the next room. The flames had spread faster than I could comprehend, their heat searing my skin even from a distance. She lifted Jacob from his bed, his small body limp with sleep and confusion. His cries pierced through the roar of the fire. We stumbled toward the stairs, the floorboards groaning under our weight. Smoke filled every inch of the house, stinging my eyes, blinding me. I could barely see the steps. Each one felt like a gamble. By the time we reached the front door, flames were licking down from the ceiling, devouring the curtains, turning photographs into ash. I shoved the door open, the rush of cold night air colliding with the inferno behind us. For a split second, I thought we'd made it. I thought we were safe. But the fire wasn't done. There was a crash from upstairs, the sound of beams collapsing. Embers rained down, sparks biting into our skin. Sarah stumbled, clutching Jacob tight, her eyes wild. "Go!" she screamed at me, pushing me forward with Emma in my arms. I ran into the yard, setting Emma down on the cold grass. She cried, coughing violently, her little body shaking. I turned back for Sarah, but in that heartbeat, the roof gave way. The explosion of flames was like a monster breathing, a wall of fire consuming everything in its path. I screamed her name, my voice tearing from my throat, but the sound was swallowed by the inferno. I tried to go back in. God help me, I tried. But the heat was unbearable, the flames impenetrable. Hands grabbed me, neighbors, I think, holding me back as I fought like a madman. "They're still in there," I shouted, struggling against their grip. But the truth was already written in the flames. I watched helplessly as my home, the place we built, the place filled with laughter, the place that held my entire world, collapsed into itself, a roaring beast devouring Sarah and Jacob before my eyes. Time warped in that moment. Seconds stretched into lifetimes. I remember the sound of Emma's sobs, the smell of burning wood and flesh, the sight of everything I loved turning into smoke that vanished into the night sky. By dawn, nothing remained but ash. Fire trucks lined the street, their hoses limp, water pooling in the frozen ground. Neighbors stood in clusters, whispering, eyes filled with pity. I sat on the curb, Emma in my arms, staring at the blackened skeleton of my home. Someone draped a blanket over my shoulders, but I barely felt it. The world had gone silent except for Emma's muffled cries. I pressed her against my chest, rocking her as if the motion could erase what had just happened. But nothing could erase it. That was the night the fire stole my family, the night it stole my future, the night it stole everything. And though I survived, a part of me burned with them. The morning after the fire, the world felt unreal, like I had slipped into someone else's nightmare. I sat on the curb wrapped in a blanket that did nothing to stop the cold. My arms ached from holding Emma so tightly, as though if I let go even for a second, she too might disappear into the smoke. The blackened skeleton of our house loomed before me, its frame charred, windows shattered, roof caved in. I stared at it, waiting for the moment I would wake up, waiting to hear Sarah call from inside, waiting to see Jacob run out into the yard, his face smeared with soot, but alive. But the house remained silent. The truth pressed down on me heavier than the smoke-filled air. They were gone. I don't remember much of the hours that followed. Firefighters moved around me, their voices low, their boots crunching in the wet ash. Neighbors whispered, some offering condolences, others simply staring. One of them asked if I wanted coffee. Another tried to place a hand on my shoulder, but I flinched away. No coffee, no words, no gentle touch could fill the void that had opened in me. At some point, the fire chief approached. His face was grim, his helmet tucked under his arm. He didn't need to speak. I already knew, but he said it anyway because that was his job. "We're sorry, Mr. Carter. We found them in the upstairs bedroom." I nodded numbly, my body refusing to react. I wanted to scream, to collapse, to punch the ground until my fists bled. But I couldn't. I was frozen, locked in a haze of disbelief. Emma clung to me, trembling. She was too young to understand fully, but she knew enough. She asked me again and again, "Where's Mommy? Where's Jacob?" Each time I opened my mouth, but no words came. How do you tell a child that her mother and brother are never coming back? The next days blurred together. There was paperwork, insurance forms, police reports, endless questions from investigators trying to determine the cause of the fire. They said it might have been faulty wiring. They said sometimes these things just happen, but no explanation could undo what had been lost. The funeral was a haze of black clothing and solemn faces. I remember the sound of dirt hitting the coffins, the way Emma's small hand clutched mine so tightly it hurt. I remember staring at Sarah's name etched into stone alongside Jacob's and feeling like I had been carved open. People spoke kind words, but I couldn't hear them. I stood there, a hollow man, unable to accept that I was burying half my family in one day. Nights were the worst. Emma cried herself to sleep, asking for her mother, for her brother. I tried to comfort her, but my own sobs often drowned hers out. When she finally slept, I sat alone in the silence, staring at the ceiling, replaying the fire in my mind. The roar of the flames, Sarah's voice shouting, Jacob's cries, it haunted me. I closed my eyes and saw it all over again. I opened my eyes and saw nothing but emptiness. I blamed myself. I was the father, the protector, the one who was supposed to keep them safe. I should have fixed the wiring. I should have checked the alarms. I should have carried them both out. No matter the flames, I lived and they didn't. Survivor's guilt is a cruel companion. It whispers that you failed, that you should have been the one taken instead. And I listened. Emma became my only anchor, the one reason I got up in the mornings. But I was drowning, and she could see it. She watched me with frightened eyes, sensing the storm inside me, even if she couldn't understand it. I tried to be strong for her, but my strength had burned with Sarah and Jacob. Family stepped in for a while. My sister offered to take us in. My parents tried to help. But grief has a way of isolating, of creating walls. Even kindness can't break through. I pushed them away, too consumed by my own pain. I told myself I could handle it, but the truth was I couldn't. As weeks turned into months, I lost myself. Work became impossible. I couldn't focus, couldn't show up. Bills piled up, savings dwindled. Emma was eventually taken in by my sister. Just until I got back on my feet, they said, but I never found my footing again. Losing Sarah and Jacob had broken me beyond repair. And with Emma gone too, the emptiness became unbearable. That was how everything slipped away. Not just my wife and son, not just our home, but my very sense of purpose. The fire didn't just kill Sarah and Jacob, it killed the man I was. After the funeral, I went back to what was left of the house. I don't even know why. Maybe I thought I'd find something the fire hadn't taken. Some piece of Sarah's laugh or Jacob's smile hidden in the ruins. What I found instead was silence. The house I had once called a castle was nothing more than a blackened skeleton. Charred beams jutted into the air like broken bones. The front porch, where Sarah and I had sat dreaming about the future, was collapsed into a heap of ash. The kitchen, once alive with the smell of stew and bread, was a hollow shell, pots melted, walls scorched. Every step I took stirred up the acrid scent of smoke that clung to everything, the kind of smell you can never wash out. I picked through the rubble with bare hands, ignoring the cuts and burns. I found Emma's teddy bear, singed but recognizable, its one glass eye staring up at me from the ash. I found the bent frame of the photo that once hung in our hallway, the one of all four of us at the beach, Sarah's arm around me, the kids laughing as a wave splashed at their feet. The glass had shattered, the picture curled and blackened, but I recognized the outlines. I pressed it to my chest as though holding it could bring them back. Neighbors stopped by, some offering help, others just watching. Their pity weighed on me heavier than the ash. They whispered about how cruel life could be, how strong I had to be for Emma. But they didn't see the truth. I wasn't strong. I was hollow. a shell of a man walking through the ashes of his life. Insurance adjusters came, speaking in cold, practical terms about total loss and coverage limits. They didn't see the wedding vows burned into those walls, the bedtime stories turned to smoke, the memories that no check could ever replace. They spoke numbers while I clutched Emma's teddy bear, and I realized that to them, this was just paperwork. To me, it was the end of everything. I spent days there, wandering through the ruins, as if by sheer will I could force the house to rise again. But every time I looked around, I saw nothing but reminders of what I had failed to save. The swing set in the yard was melted into twisted metal. The dining table where we'd shared Sunday dinners was reduced to ash. The upstairs bedroom where I had tucked my children in every night was gone, swallowed whole by flames. One evening, I sat on the curb across the street, watching the smoke curl into the sky as the sun went down. The house looked like a grave, and in many ways it was. Not just for Sarah and Jacob, but for the man I had been. People told me to move forward, to start over. But how do you start over when every piece of your heart is buried in ash? How do you rebuild when the foundation is gone? I didn't have answers. All I had was loss. Emma stayed with my sister while I tried to piece myself together. I thought maybe I could salvage enough to create a new home for us. But each attempt failed. I couldn't work without breaking down. I couldn't sleep without waking in panic, the fire replaying in my dreams. I'd jolt awake, the phantom smell of smoke choking me, Sarah's screams echoing in my ears. I visited Emma, of course. She needed me, but the truth is, I was barely there even when I stood in front of her. She'd ask when we'd get a new house, when things would be like before. I'd force a smile, but my eyes betrayed me. Children see more than we realize. She knew her father was gone, even if I was still breathing. The day came when my sister sat me down, her eyes heavy with worry. "Daniel, you need help," she said gently. "Emma needs stability. She needs more than you can give right now." Her words cut deeper than any knife, but she was right. I was drowning, and I was pulling Emma down with me. I agreed to let her stay there longer, telling myself it was temporary. But part of me knew it was the beginning of another loss. Without Sarah, without Jacob, without Emma, the house in ashes became the perfect reflection of my life. Empty, broken, uninhabitable. I walked away from Maple Street one final time, the ruins still smoldering, the teddy bear in my hand, the only piece I could carry. I didn't look back. Not because I didn't want to, but because looking back meant acknowledging that my life as I knew it was truly over. The ashes of home weren't just wood and stone. They were me. The weeks after the fire blurred into one long gray haze. I woke each morning not to the sound of Sarah's laugh or the kids tumbling down the stairs, but to silence. Thick, suffocating silence. My sister's house had become Emma's refuge, but for me it was a reminder of how far I had fallen. I felt like a guest in my own family, an intruder in a life that wasn't mine. The funeral had been a blur of black suits, flowers, and words that didn't touch the gaping wound in my chest. People told me to be strong, to lean on my faith, to think of Emma. They meant well, but their voices rang hollow. Strength, faith, hope, those things had burned with Sarah and Jacob. I tried to return to work at the factory, thinking routine might numb the pain. But the machines were too loud, their grinding echoing the roar of the fire in my head. The smell of oil and smoke sent me reeling, my hands shaking so badly I couldn't hold tools steady. After a week of mistakes and breakdowns, I quit. Or maybe I was let go. I can't even remember anymore. All I know is that I walked out of those doors and never went back. Nights were worse. Sleep came in fragments, haunted by dreams that felt too real. I saw flames crawling across the ceiling, Sarah's hand slipping from mine, Jacob's cries echoing as I reached for him through smoke. I'd wake drenched in sweat, heart racing, convinced I was still trapped in that house. Sometimes I'd wander outside just to breathe cold air, to prove to myself I had escaped, even if part of me wished I hadn't. Emma tried to be brave, but she was just a child. She clung to her aunt, asking questions I couldn't answer. "Why did God take Mommy and Jacob? Why didn't you save them, Daddy?" Each word was a knife. I wanted to hold her, to promise her safety, but how could I? I hadn't kept her mother or brother safe. How could she trust me? Slowly, even Emma slipped further away. My sister and her husband provided stability I couldn't. Their house was warm, their routine steady, their love unbroken. Emma laughed with her cousins, did her homework at the kitchen table, and fell asleep without waking in terror. I told myself it was temporary, that I'd get back on my feet and bring her home. But in my heart, I knew. Home no longer existed. Bills piled up. Insurance covered some of the damage, but lawyers and debts swallowed the rest. Without work, without savings, I sold what little remained. Tools, clothes, keepsakes. Each sale felt like tearing away another piece of myself. Soon, even those were gone. Friends called at first, checking in, offering meals, inviting me to stay. But grief makes people uncomfortable, and over time, the calls stopped. Invitations faded. Neighbors crossed the street when they saw me. Maybe they didn't know what to say, or maybe they were afraid of catching my misfortune, as though tragedy were contagious. The loneliness grew unbearable. I began drinking, not much at first, just enough to quiet the noise in my head. But enough became too much. I lost hours, nights, entire weekends to the bottom of a bottle. Alcohol dulled the pain, blurred the memories, but when it wore off, the fire roared back louder. One night after too many drinks, I wandered back to Maple Street. I stood in front of the charred ruins, swaying, the teddy bear clutched in my hand. The neighbors had rebuilt their homes, repainted their porches, moved forward. But mine remained a blackened scar. I collapsed on the curb, sobbing, begging Sarah and Jacob to forgive me. Of course, there was no answer, only the echo of my voice in the empty street. It wasn't long after that I stopped sleeping under roofs. My sister tried, but she had her own family to protect. My drinking, my despair, it was too much. I left before she asked me to. Maybe I thought I was sparing her, sparing Emma, from watching me unravel further. Or maybe I just couldn't bear to see their pity anymore. And so, the aftermath of the fire didn't just take Sarah and Jacob. It took my work, my daughter, my place in the world. I became what I never thought I would be, a man with nothing. But the cruelest part wasn't the hunger or the bold or the looks from strangers. The cruelest part was carrying memories so vivid they burned brighter than the flames. I remembered Emma's first steps, Jacob's giggle, Sarah's kiss on my cheek as I walked out of the door. They were alive in my mind, even as their absence hollowed me out. The fire ended in one night, but its aftermath stretched on forever. Grief doesn't announce itself like a storm. It seeps in slowly, filling every crack until you're drowning without realizing it. After the fire, after the funerals, after Emma settled into my sister's home, I thought I could somehow piece myself back together. But instead, I unraveled day by day, thread by thread, until I barely recognized the man staring back at me in the mirror. At first, I told myself I just needed time. Time to heal, time to get back to work, time to rebuild. I woke up each morning determined to move forward, but by noon I was paralyzed by memories. I'd hear Jacob's laugh in the hum of the refrigerator, Sarah's voice in the wind outside, Emma's footsteps in the hallway that no longer existed. The world kept turning, but mine had stopped. Work was impossible. Every machine reminded me of the roar of the flames. Every whiff of smoke from the factory floor sent me spiraling. My coworkers tried to help, covering for me when I froze mid-shift, but soon I became more liability than worker. I quit before they could fire me, but the result was the same. No income, no purpose, bills went unpaid. Letters piled up demanding money I didn't have. Debt collectors left voicemails I ignored, their voices cold, mechanical. My bank account dwindled to nothing, and still I clung to denial. I sold furniture, tools, even Sarah's old wedding band that I had rescued from the ashes. Each sale was like cutting away another piece of my soul, but survival demanded sacrifice. Drinking became my crutch. At first, just a few beers to help me sleep, to quiet the nightmares. But grief is greedy, and soon a few became many. I traded meals for bottles, traded clarity for oblivion. The burn of whiskey in my throat was the only thing stronger than the burn of guilt in my chest. People say alcohol numbs pain, but for me, it only delayed it. When the fog cleared, the fire returned, brighter and crueler. Friends drifted away. They stopped inviting me to gatherings, stopped calling to check in. Some couldn't handle the darkness I carried. Others simply moved on with their lives. I didn't blame them. Who wants to sit with a man who can talk about nothing but death and loss? Even family grew distant. My sister tried the longest, urging me to seek counseling, offering meals, insisting I stay with her. But I couldn't bear the sight of Emma looking at me with confusion, maybe even disappointment. She was thriving with her cousins, laughing in ways she no longer did around me. I told myself she was better off without me, though the truth was I couldn't face the reflection of my failures in her eyes. Isolation became my companion. I spent days wandering aimlessly, nights in bars or on park benches. The teddy bear I had pulled from the ruins never left my side, a grim reminder of what I had failed to save. Sometimes in my drunken haze, I talked to it, imagining Jacob's voice answering back. I knew it was madness, but madness was easier than silence. Sleep was rare. When it came, it brought nightmares. Flames licking the walls, Sarah's screams, Jacob's cries, on endless repeat. I'd wake drenched in sweat, shaking, convinced I smelled smoke. No amount of drinking could erase those dreams. They were stitched into me, scars that no one could see. Health slipped away too. My body weakened, my face hollowed, my hands shook even when I was sober. I stopped caring about food, about clothes, about anything. The man who once worked double shifts to provide for his family was gone, replaced by a ghost stumbling through the remnants of a life. I remember one night stumbling into the old church where Sarah and I had been married. The pews creaked under my weight, the air smelled of dust and candle wax. I dropped to my knees, not in prayer but in defeat. I wanted to shout at God, to demand answers, but no words came, only sobs. I stayed there until dawn, the light from stained glass painting colors across my broken body. But even there, even in that sacred place, I found no peace. The fall wasn't sudden, it was steady, relentless. Each day chipped away at me, another piece lost until there was nothing left to hold on to. By the time winter came, I had sold everything of value, alienated everyone who cared, and lost even the will to try. That was when the streets claimed me. Not because I wanted them to, but because there was nowhere else left to go. And so, Daniel Carter, husband, father, provider, collapsed fully into the man you see now, homeless, broken, carrying only a story that no one wants to hear. The fire may have sparked the fall, but grief fanned the flames until I was nothing but ash, walking in human form. Grief makes you believe the world has stopped, but it doesn't. The truth is, it only stops for you. For everyone else, life goes on. Cars keep rolling down the streets, kids still laugh on playgrounds, neighbors mow their lawns, holidays come and go. It's cruel in a way to watch the world move forward while you remain frozen in the moment everything ended. For me, that moment was the fire. The world I knew ended that night, but the days after proved something even more painful. That my tragedy was just another story for others, something they whispered about for a while before filing away under life goes on. At first, people reached out. Neighbors brought casseroles. Old friends sent messages of sympathy. My church organized a small fundraiser, dropping envelopes of cash into a jar with my name on it. I appreciated the kindness, but none of it filled the hole inside me. Food spoiled, uneaten, cash disappeared into bills, and the faces that once looked at me with compassion slowly turned away. By the second month, the calls grew fewer. People crossed the street when they saw me coming, unsure what to say, maybe afraid my grief was contagious. Invitations stopped arriving. Birthdays, weddings, barbecues, all went on without me. The world moved on, and I was left standing still, holding ashes in my hands. I saw it most clearly with Emma. At first, she clung to me, her little arms wrapped tight around my neck every time I visited my sister's house. "When are we going home, Daddy?" She'd ask, eyes wide with hope. I'd smile through the pain and tell her, "Soon." But soon never came. Weeks turned into months, and Emma adjusted to life without me. She laughed more with her cousins, leaned on her aunt for comfort, drew pictures that no longer included me in the corner of the page. I became a visitor in her life, A ghost she hugged politely before running back to play. I told myself it was for the best, that she needed stability I couldn't give. But the truth was, I was watching my daughter move on without me. The town moved on too. New families built houses where old ones had burned. The blackened ruins of mine were eventually cleared, the lot flattened, ready for someone else's dreams. The swing set where Jacob once played was hauled away as scrap. The charred beams that had once held Sarah's laughter crumbled into dust. Where my life had stood was now just an empty patch of land. People passed by it daily without thought. But for me, it was sacred ground, a grave without markers. I wandered those streets like a ghost, unseen and unwanted. The grocery store where Sarah and I once shopped became a place I avoided because the clerks no longer met my eyes. The diner where we had family breakfast was filled with strangers who didn't know my story and didn't care to. Even the church, where I once found comfort, grew colder. Pews filled with familiar faces, but when I walked in, silence hung heavy. Some offered polite nods, but most looked away. The grieving man had become an inconvenience. Even work moved on. The factory hired new men to take my place, men younger, stronger, unburdened by ghosts. My absence was a hiccup in their schedule, nothing more. The machines kept grinding. The world kept spinning. My contributions were forgotten as quickly as smoke fades into the sky. There's a unique cruelty in watching the world forget your pain. At first, you want sympathy, want someone to acknowledge the weight you carry. But as time passes, pity turns to avoidance. People don't want reminders of how fragile their own happiness is. They'd rather not see you because seeing you means facing the truth that everything can vanish in a single night. I felt it every day, the pull of invisibility. Conversations cut short when I approached, eyes sliding past me in the street. The way people whispered my name with lowered voices. Not Michael Carter, not neighbor, not friend. Just that man who lost his family. So I withdrew further. I stopped visiting places that reminded me of what I'd lost. I stopped answering the few calls that still came. I let myself fade because fading was easier than being ignored. But the world's movement was relentless, and I couldn't keep up. Rent went unpaid, debts piled higher, and before long, I lost even the temporary rooms I rented. My sister's patience, though deep, eventually wore thin. She had Emma to think of, and I couldn't blame her. She needed to protect my daughter from the weight of my collapse. So one day I packed what little remained into a worn bag, hugged Emma tighter than ever, and walked out with no plan of return. The world had moved on without me, and now I was moving out of it too, onto the streets, into the shadows, into a life where the only constant was loss. The fire had taken my family in one night, but watching the world move on, watching everyone forget, was its own kind of fire. Slow, relentless, and just as consuming. And it burned me until there was almost nothing left. I never imagined I'd end up on the streets. No man does. You tell yourself it could never happen. You work too hard. You have too much pride. Listen, you'll always find a way. But grief has a way of breaking even the strongest promises you make to yourself. And by the time the dust settled, I wasn't Daniel Carter, the husband, or Daniel Carter, the father. I was just Daniel Carter, the homeless man. It didn't happen overnight. At first, I rented small rooms in rundown motels, telling myself it was temporary. Just until I got a new job. Just until I pulled myself together. I lined up interviews, but couldn't hold myself steady enough to convince anyone I was worth hiring. The tremble in my hands, the hollow look in my eyes, they saw it before I said a word. Employers want stability, and I was anything but stable. Money drained fast. What little the insurance had given me after the fire was gone in weeks, swallowed by bills and debts. I sold everything of value, Sarah's wedding ring, Emma's old crib, even Jacob's baseball glove. Each item was more than an object. It was a memory, a piece of the life I'd lost. Selling them felt like selling parts of my soul, but survival demanded it. When the money and the possessions were gone, I started sleeping on couches. Friends, distant relatives, anyone kind enough to let me stay. But grief wears down even kindness. My drinking, my silence, my inability to rejoin the world pushed people away. One by one, doors closed. And with each closed door, I stepped closer to the street. The night it finally happened, I remember the sky was heavy with snow. I had nowhere left to go. I walked aimlessly, clutching the teddy bear I had pulled from the ashes, the only thing I refused to sell. I ended up in the city park, the benches dusted white, the trees bare and skeletal. I sat down, pulled my coat tight, and told myself it was just for one night. But one night became two, two became a week, and before long, the streets had claimed me. At first, I fought to hold on to some shred of normalcy. I shaved in gas station bathrooms, washed my face in public sinks, tried to keep my clothes clean at laundromats. But little by little, the routine slipped. Cold nights wore me down, hunger gnawed at me, and soon I didn't recognize the reflection in the dirty glass of store windows. The man staring back wasn't the father who used to tuck his children in. He wasn't the husband who once kissed his wife on the porch. He was someone else entirely, someone broken, beaten, and forgotten. The first time I begged for money, shame burned hotter than any fire. I sat outside a grocery store, paper cup in hand, and couldn't bring myself to lift my head. People passed, some dropping coins without a glance, others sneering as if I were dirt on their shoes. I wanted to shout, "I'm not just a beggar. I had a family, a home, a life." But the words died in my throat. On the streets, no one cares who you were, only who you are. Nights were the hardest. Cold seeped into my bones, sleep came in fragments, and every sound jolted me awake. I huddled under thin blankets, clutching the teddy bear, whispering Sarah's and Jacob's names like prayers. Sometimes I dreamed of the fire again, waking with the phantom smell of smoke choking me. Other times I dreamed of the house as it once was, warm, full of laughter, only to wake to silence and frost. I found community among others like me, men and women who had also lost too much, who carried invisible scars. We shared scraps of food, stories of better days, warnings about which alleys were dangerous, which shelters had beds. They became my new neighbors, my new family of the broken. But even in their company, loneliness lingered. Because no one could replace Sarah. No one could bring back Emma's giggles or Jacob's stubborn grin. The streets didn't just take comfort, they took dignity. Being invisible hurts in ways hunger never can. People walked past me like I wasn't there, their eyes sliding away. Once, a little boy pointed at me and asked his mother who I was. She pulled him close and whispered, "Don't look." That cut deeper than anything, because I wanted to scream, "Look, please see me. See that I was someone once." I had gone from owning a house on Maple Street to claiming a bench under a broken lamppost. From being a father tucking his kids into bed to being a man huddling alone in the dark. From being Daniel Carter the husband to Daniel Carter the homeless. And though I told myself I still had Emma, even she felt further away with every passing day. Letters grew fewer, visits shorter. She was growing into a life without me, and I couldn't blame her. She deserved light, laughter, stability, all the things I could no longer give. So I stayed in the shadows, a ghost wandering the city. The fire had taken my family in a single night, but the streets took everything else, piece by piece, until nothing remained but a name and a story no one wanted to hear. Life on the streets is not living, it is surviving, one breath, one step, one hungry night at a time. People imagine it's just about not having a roof, but it's more than that. It's about losing your place in the world, about watching everyone else walk past as if you're invisible, as if you never mattered at all. At first, I tried to hold on to some dignity. I'd wash up in public restrooms, shave when I could, keep my clothes as clean as possible. I wanted people to see me as Daniel Carter, the man I had been, not just another homeless face. But dignity doesn't last long out there. Cold creeps in, hunger gnaws constantly, and eventually, the weight of it all breaks you down. The first winter nearly killed me. I remember huddling under a thin blanket on a park bench, the wind cutting through every layer. My fingers went numb, my body shook uncontrollably, and I thought, maybe this is it. Maybe I'll fall asleep and never wake up. Part of me welcomed it, but morning came, and with it, the realization that I had to endure another day. Food was always uncertain. Some days I lined up at church kitchens, grateful for a bowl of soup and a piece of bread. Other days, I dug through dumpsters behind restaurants, searching for scraps that hadn't spoiled. At first, shame burned hotter than hunger, but shame doesn't fill your stomach. Hunger wins every time. People's reactions were the hardest to bear. Some walked past as if I didn't exist. Others looked at me with disgust, pulling their children closer, whispering, "Don't stare." A few tossed coins into my cup, not out of kindness, but out of guilt, unable to meet my eyes. Every look reminded me that I had become something less than human in their world, a warning of what could happen if life turned cruel. But there were rare moments of grace. A man once handed me a sandwich and said, "Stay strong, brother." A little girl pressed an apple into my palm, smiling shyly before her mother pulled her away. A volunteer at a shelter remembered my name, and for a moment I felt seen again. Those small acts of kindness kept me from falling completely into despair. At night, when the city grew quiet, I'd stare up at the stars and think of Sarah and the kids. I'd whisper their names, afraid the silence would swallow them if I didn't. The teddy bear I'd salvaged from the ashes never left my side. It was battered and singed, but it was a piece of them, a reminder that once I had been loved. Sometimes I pressed it against my chest and cried until exhaustion silenced me. The streets had their own rules, their own community. I met other men broken by life, veterans haunted by wars, workers laid off after decades of labor, mothers abandoned by the very families they had raised. We shared stories around trash fires, divided scraps of food, and looked out for each other when the nights turned dangerous. In that broken fellowship, I found a strange kind of belonging. We were all invisible together. Still, loneliness clung to me. Even surrounded by others, I felt the absence of my family like an open wound. I'd see fathers walking their children to school, mothers laughing with toddlers, couples holding hands, and it tore me apart. They didn't know how lucky they were. They didn't know how fragile it all was. One fire, one twist of fate, and everything could be gone. Police didn't make life easier. They saw us as nuisances, shooing us from sidewalks, flashing lights in our faces, threatening arrests. "Move along," they'd bark, as if we were trash that needed sweeping away. I used to wear a uniform myself once, to work hard, to pay taxes. Now I was treated as though I didn't deserve to exist. Health slipped away quickly. Cold nights left me coughing for weeks. Cuts became infections. I grew thinner, weaker. Sometimes I wondered if my body was simply giving up, if I would vanish quietly without anyone noticing. And yet, every morning, I woke. I breathed. I survived. Life on the streets isn't about thriving. It's about clinging to existence even when the world has erased you. It's about holding on to memories when everything else has been stripped away. I lost my family in a fire, my home to the flames, my dignity to the streets. But I carried their love, even in ashes. It was the only thing the fire couldn't burn, the only thing the streets couldn't take. And so, even in hunger, even in cold, even in invisibility, I whispered to myself, I am Daniel Carter. I was a husband. I was a father. I was loved. Because out here, sometimes the only thing keeping you alive is remembering who you once were. Grief is a heavy thing, but on the streets, it becomes invisible. People see the ragged clothes, the unshaven face, the empty cup in my hands, but they don't see the fire that haunts me. They don't see Sarah's smile, or Jacob's laugh, or Emma's tiny arms wrapped around my neck. They don't see the man who lost everything in one night. To them, I'm just another homeless figure blending into the background of the city. Every morning I woke with that grief pressing down on me, as constant as the cold. I'd sit on a park bench or on the steps of a library, watching the world pass by. Mothers rushed their children to school. Businessmen hurried with coffee cups. Joggers pounded the pavement with headphones in. None of them looked my way. None of them knew that behind my tired eyes was a man who once had the very things they now took for granted. Sometimes I wanted to scream at them. I had a family too. I was a husband, a father, a man with a home. But I never did. What good would it do? To them, my words would just sound like the ramblings of a broken man. And maybe that's what I was. The truth is, invisibility was its own kind of fire. It consumed slowly, burning dignity instead of walls, reducing hope instead of wood. At least when Sarah and Jacob died, people came to the funeral. People acknowledged the loss. Out here, on the streets, my grief was unseen. No funerals for a broken man, no ceremonies for the life I'd lost, just silence. I carried tokens of the past to remind myself it was real. The singed teddy bear from the ruins of our house was always with me, tucked into my coat. People probably thought it was trash, but to me it was everything. On nights when the wind howled and the cold seeped into my bones, I held it close, pretending it was Jacob's small hand in mine. I whispered to it sometimes, telling stories only he would have understood. It kept me tethered to the man I had been. Emma's absence was another wound. Though she lived, she was out of reach. My sister shielded her from me more and more, saying she needed stability, that seeing me like this would only confuse her. She was right. I didn't want Emma to remember her father as the man hunched on a sidewalk, begging for coins. Still, it hurt. The world had already forgotten me. Must my daughter forget too? The other homeless men and women I met carried their own invisible grief. One woman named Claire had lost her husband to cancer and her house to medical bills. A veteran named Marcus talked to ghosts from the war every night. We all sat together, invisible to the world, visible only to each other. Our stories wove a fragile net of understanding, but no net can catch grief forever. Some nights, I'd wander back to Maple Street, to the empty lot where my house once stood. The land was cleared now, ready for someone else's dream. I'd stand at the edge, staring at the dirt, imagining the walls rising again. Sarah calling from the kitchen, Jacob and Emma playing in the yard. Neighbors sometimes noticed me and whispered, "That's him. That's the man who lost his family in the fire." But their voices carried pity, not recognition. They saw tragedy, not the man behind it. Being invisible taught me how fragile identity is. Before the fire, I was Daniel Carter, husband, father, worker, neighbor. After the fire, I became that poor man, the drunk, the homeless guy with the teddy bear. People defined it by my losses, not my life. And the longer I stayed in the shadows, the more I feared they were right. But grief, invisible as it was, shaped me. It taught me that survival wasn't just about food or shelter, it was about memory. Remembering Sarah's laugh, Jacob's stubborn grin, Emma's sleepy hugs, those memories kept me human when the world treated me like less. One night, a little girl walking with her mother stopped in front of me. She stared at the teddy bear poking from my coat and whispered, "I used to have one like that." Her mother tugged her away quickly, muttering, "Don't bother him." But in that brief moment, someone had seen me. Not as trash, not as a nuisance, but as a man holding on to something precious. That look in her eyes reminded me I wasn't entirely invisible. Grief remains, even when no one else sees it. It's stitched into me, as much a part of me as my name. And though the world walks past without noticing, I know it's there. I live with invisible grief. And sometimes I wonder if that's all I'll ever be. When you lose everything, your home, your family, your place in the world, you're left standing in the ruins, asking in the same question over and over, what remains of me? For a long time, I thought the answer was nothing. The fire had taken Sarah and Jacob. The courts and circumstance had taken Emma. Life had stripped me bare until all that was left was a man on a sidewalk, forgotten and unseen. But as the years passed, I learned something hard. Grief doesn't erase you. It changes you. It carves away the illusions you once clung to, leaving behind something raw, something truer than you'd ever wanted to know. I used to define myself by the roles I played. I was a husband, a father, a worker at the factory, a neighbor on Maple Street. Those roles burned down with my house, leaving me to wonder if I had vanished too. But I didn't. The man I was still lived inside me, though he was battered, scarred, and unrecognizable at times. What remains of me is memory. I remember Sarah's laugh, the way it rang through the house when she burned cookies, turning disaster into comedy. I remember Jacob tugging at my pant leg, demanding to play catch even when I was bone-tired. I remember Emma's soft goodnight hugs, her tiny voice whispering, "I love you, Daddy," before drifting off to sleep. These memories are not ash. They live in me, and as long as I carry them, Sarah and Jacob are not gone. As long as I speak Emma's name, she remains tethered to me. What remains of me is dignity, though it's been tested in ways I never imagined. People may walk past me as if I'm invisible, but I know who I am. I am not just the homeless man on the corner. I am Daniel Carter. I am a father who once rocked his children to sleep, a husband who once dreamed of forever, a man who once built a home with his own two hands. The world may not acknowledge that, but I do. And sometimes that's enough to survive another day. What remains of me is resilience. The fire should have killed me. Grief should have swallowed me whole. The streets should have broken me beyond repair. And yet, I'm still here. Every morning I wake, every night I endure, is proof that the fire didn't win. Survival itself is defiance. And perhaps most of all, what remains of me is a story. I tell it sometimes to strangers who will listen, to volunteers in shelters, to other lost souls huddled around a fire. I tell it not for pity, but for truth. People need to know that behind every man or woman on the streets is a story, a film, a betrayal, a sickness, a loss. No one chooses this life, not in the way the world assumes. We are here because the ground gave way beneath us, and we had nowhere else to fall. When I tell my story, I see something change in people's eyes. For a moment, they see me, not as trash, not as a shadow, but as a man who loved, who lost, who still carries the weight of invisible grief. And in that moment, I feel human again. I will never have back what I lost. Sarah and Jacob are gone forever. Emma is out there, growing without me, perhaps forgetting the sound of my voice. The house on Maple Street has been rebuilt, someone else's laughter echoing in its rooms. I walk by sometimes, and though it hurts, I also feel a strange comfort. Life continues, even when mine has collapsed. But I remain. I remain in the memories I refuse to let die. I remain in the stories I tell. I remain in the stubborn breath I take each morning, proof that the fire didn't destroy everything. So when people pass me on the sidewalk and look away, when children ask their parents who I am and are told, "Don't look," I whisper to myself, I am still Daniel Carter. I was a husband. I was a father. I was loved. And that truth, fragile as it is, keeps me alive. What remains of me is not a house, not wealth, not even family by my side. What remains is love, memory, dignity, and the will to endure. The fire may have taken everything else, but it could not take that. And as long as I breathe, as long as I speak their names, I am still here. I am what remains.